No, just testing this out.
Hi, Huda. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Greetings, everyone. It looks like it's the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. We have a really great session lined up. On your screen, you should see a slide that has some of the conference links. My name is Hilary Thorsen. I will be facilitating this session, and Jeannette Ho is joining as our chat moderator. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This session is the journey of an entity from MARC or BIBFRAME to a discovery interface, a discussion of opportunities for and effects of the use of linked data. I'm looking forward to a really interactive session. Before we get started, as you'll see on the screen, there's a link to our conference website where you can find additional sessions, all of the conference information, to check out the LD4 2021 poster submissions. Then also on our slide, we have a link to the code of conduct, which is also available from the LD4 conference page, and want to create a really welcoming and inclusive space to encourage everyone to feel comfortable participating and really have a great experience with the conference. So please read the code of conduct if you haven't already. And then we also are on Twitter at LD4 Conference, and you are welcome to use the hashtag LD4 2021 to tweet about this session and other parts of the conference. I also would encourage you to join Slack. We have a Slack space for LD4 2021 with many channels, including a discovery channel, which will be relevant for the conversation today. So definitely join if you want to connect and network with others over Slack. And then finally, we have a tech support channel in the Slack space. So if you're having any issues with any of the aspects of the conference, getting into Zoom, finding information, you can use that channel to help get some help. And then finally, we have a really great collaborative project. It is doing a Wikidata project, reconciling and creating entities for Chilean filmmakers. So if you haven't checked that out yet, I encourage you to take a peek. Someone shared earlier in the chat that there's already over 100 references that have been added, so that's great. And so keep working away. And let's see, I also want to tell you that this session is being live streamed to the LD4 YouTube channel and recorded, and it will be saved, the recording will be saved on YouTube for future viewing. And then additionally, as I mentioned, this is going to be an interactive session. So if you would like to speak, please say that you'd like to speak in the chat, and then we'll be able to call on you, and you can unmute yourself as this is in a Zoom meeting. And so now, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Huda Khan, who is a software and UX developer at Cornell University. She's interested in the design and architecture of linked data systems and how these systems can better meet user needs. And so I'm going to turn things over to you, Huda.
Thank you, Hilary. I'm going to go ahead and put the links for the slides and for the document. And this is supposed to be an interactive session, but if you don't feel comfortable writing something down, you can always reach out to me later, although it would be great if you did write something down and participate, and that'd be wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. The two links I've already put in the chat. One is for the slides, and one will be for this document that we can hopefully all collaboratively edit. So thank you, Hilary, for saying a very long title. I said in the Discovery Slack channel, I will once again note that I should have picked a shorter one, as my second slide says, really just went for the a greater number of words than maybe was required. So in some sort of linked data optimistic frame of mind, we had come up with this idea that we wanted to see if we could discuss how entities are represented in library systems, and then how they are or can be used for discovery. And so the idea behind this is that we already do capture information about authors and subjects and works and all of the good stuff that we talk about when it comes to modeling this information, whether it's in MARC or whether it's in some internal codex somewhere, or whether it's in a linked data format. I don't know that we always think of entities sort of as an object, almost something that's encapsulated and contained and very neatly can be referred to as this person or this subject across library systems. I think maybe within certain portions, it's easier to see than in others. But the truth is, I'm not a librarian or a metadata expert. So what would be great is for the people that are on this call, or if later on you're looking at this document and have an epiphany, to really share your expertise and your knowledge and your thoughts about this and your questions, and also to comment on anything that may have been left out. So the objective, again, for this session is really to try to get people to discuss this and to see what people think. We've already, these are linked here. The links are also on the Sketch URL or the website for this session and in the chat. So this is the overall format that we were going to adopt. We will start with each discussion set, and I'll talk about what those are. And maybe spend 5 minutes to add thoughts to the document. And you can see the document is also laid out like that. And I'll show you that on the screen too in a minute. And then maybe we can spend 5 minutes to open it up for discussion. And the objective of the sort of live version of the discussion is to not necessarily summarize what's already been put into the document, but either to highlight something that someone may see that there's a pattern emerging, or that they want to note something of importance, or ask a question that perhaps hasn't been asked yet. And some of that might be that something is missing in this discussion, and you would like to contribute, what it is that it still needs. So the three main questions that were in the abstract, so you know that we have not led you astray, and we are in fact sticking to what we said we would stick to, are the first discussion is really around just wrapping our heads around what library systems are. So like I mentioned, I am not a librarian and I am not a metadata expert. I am a developer and UX person, which means that I get to see some of this stuff in action, but the kind of rhyme or reason behind it is, I wouldn't say necessarily a mystery, but I definitely could do with a lot more background on this. So I hope some of you can fill that in. And also, again, not to name drop, we did add FOLIO to this description, and because it is definitely a player in this space, and also because it answers the question of BIBFRAME or MARC by not using either technically internally, although it could use either and does use MARC in its systems that are live now. So the first part is to really try to map what the library systems are, and when we say entities, how are those represented and where are they represented? The second discussion could be to step back and say, all right, we have something like a map. It might not be a perfect map, but it's spots that we can anchor some questions to or some thoughts to. And where in these systems, or where in these processes is it possible to start making connections to linked data, and where might that be useful? And then it's the same format where we'll open it up and you can add your thoughts to the document, and then hopefully have some discussion with people. And the third part is to think about possibilities for supporting discovery. So we've hopefully will have some info on how entities journey across library systems. We'll know maybe where we can make linked data connections. And then what do we do with that? Like, once we have that those linked data connections. In theory or in practice, what can we do with those to help support discovery? So hopefully we'll stick to time on this, and then we'll have some, if we have some time left over, we'll have some feedback and discussion at the end. To start with the first one, actually, before I do that, as I'm going through the very first set of slides, if people can go to the document, and in the top part where it says you already see the agenda laid out on the top. Under introductions, if you would like to, you can put your name and institution and just something about what you would like to happen or have happened in this discussion, what kind of output you might be interested in. But at the very least, if you could put your name and institution in, that would be great. And just feel free to, sorry? I wasn't sure if someone said something. Yeah, so this, and if this should be shared, I will just double check that it is. Yep, you should be able to edit it. So please feel free to do that. I'm going to go back to these slides. So the very first topic, and I have a few slides, so I'm going to have a few slides for each topic area or each discussion area, so that if we have something to react to at the very least. So the first set of questions are, can we better understand how information related to an entity is captured, as whether in MARC or BIBFRAME, or if there's a third alternative, like for instance, FOLIO or something else, we can talk about that too. How's that information then relayed across library systems to be made available in discovery layer? So I keep asking for a book or a resource about library systems for someone like me. So sort of a reverse of the usual, like library carpentry or whatever sessions, which seem to be aimed at librarians, trying to equip them with the kind of programming knowledge or tech systems knowledge they need. I would really love for someone to tell me if there's a resource for someone like me who's not a librarian, but who wants to have a better understanding of what library systems are and how information travels through them. So I did find a resource, and I can share that later, which tried to, put up some big boxes and say, here are some things. And we've had some discussions. So again, I think someone's unmuted, but I'm not sure if they're saying something directly. You have acquisitions, cataloging, and you get information. So instead of thinking about this in terms of like books and resources moving through it, it'd be nice to think of it in terms of, for this discussion, the information, and specifically how entities might be represented. So how are people and subjects and potentially works represented in each of these areas? So you acquire some stuff, you catalog some stuff. Electronic resources, are out there somewhere. They're probably also being cataloged or are definitely being cataloged. And then, you might have a situation where you want to edit some information later. You may want to renew some information. So there's another process happening at that point. And all of this ends up in our catalog, and our discovery systems that face end users are using this information and perhaps other sources of information. If this diagram looks either unappealing or very, not great, that's fine. So, because I made it, and again, I'm not a librarian. So if you know that something belongs here that is not, represented, it would be great for you to add that comment or put that in. And so, at any of these points, so if we're looking at acquisitions, what kind of metadata about information is being supplied there? What are our options? If we're looking at cataloging, we're looking at authorized access points. Are we hopefully relying on URIs and identifiers somewhere? If we're looking at a system like Sinopia, for instance, for cataloging, or some hybrid process, are we capable of integrating lookups to other authorities, to other data sources? And then finally, the discovery layer. Can we pull in identifiers at the display level, or maybe we're doing some kind of interesting indexing approach or caching approach for the linked data version, or maybe we have identifiers already in MARC that we can then rely on. So I put these there again, not because they are canon or because they're necessarily correct, but these are sort of the question that's being asked. And then many of you may already be familiar with FOLIO. If you were not, there are links in the slides that go to that. And the objective at a very high level is a collaborative effort to build a platform of services for libraries. So I do have these links open. The reason these two are open is the first one kind of gets at how information is modeled within FOLIO. And so what this means is that FOLIO can ingest and interact with MARC, and it does, but internally it's using a different model to capture this information. And maybe somebody knows how people and subjects are represented, but this is about the actual resources in the catalog or that are being handled. There is an entity management working group that has user stories and has put together this conceptual diagram. So some of this does not exist, and the objective here I think is very similar to the question we're asking, which is being able to understand how entities can be represented and then how they can be moved through the FOLIO system. So those of you not familiar with FOLIO, inventory is essentially the main data that's being used and added and looked up in the catalog. And a FOLIO expert on the call may have a different definition, in which case they should provide that. But you can see here, again, I think the dashed diagram or dash portion does not exist right now as such, but it could be a way of representing agents and subjects and other entities in a way that can then be used throughout the system. So that was a lot, I realize. And I'm actually going to skip this one. You can look at it, but this slide just talks about potential FOLIO modules and the model that are relevant. So really what would be great to maybe, unless someone has a question right now, they would really like to ask. I do see some comments about the diagram being apt, but there's also missing things, which is great. Those are great comments to have. Okay, and then feel free to ask a question at any time. So without further ado, if we could spend maybe just 5 minutes on this first question, can we better understand how information related to an entity is captured and how it's related across library systems? Just please go ahead and add any thoughts, questions, suggestions, comments you might have right here. Please add a new bullet. And in that bullet, if you could say, if what you're talking about is something that exists currently or might exist, and both are fine. So I see some people adding some stuff, so that's great. Is there any way you could blow up your diagrams for us to get a clear view? Zainab, do you have the links? I can give you the links to the slides themselves if that's helpful, but I can try to make it bigger. The slides are here. Was there a specific diagram you wanted? Yes, and the document I'll put in again. I think Bob may have done that too, but the document is here. So we'll give that till about 1:24. One that had something of, oh, yes, that is. I can try. Or perhaps, Bob, that was what you had just shared. Maybe that's a little too big. I'll drop it in unless, apologies, Bob, if you already dropped this one in. Sure. Yes, thank you, David. It's an excellent comment, and feel free to. I mean, that's the kind of comment you could put into the document as well. I do wonder about. Again, I'm not a librarian, about archives and special collections and how those relate. I should probably stop saying I'm not a librarian because I feel like I've said it enough times that everybody knows. Some good stuff being added. We'll give it just a few more minutes. And if you don't have the links to the document or the presentation, we put them in the chat, but they're also on the schedule page. I'm going to try very hard not to speak the entire time. I think I could. I'll make this bigger. Some really interesting things being added. We'll give it another minute. Like I say, I'd rather enjoy a session where I don't have to have the answers. Okay, feel free to continue writing. We'll just open it up for 2 or 3 minutes to see if people have anything that jumps out at them. I'm seeing like the first one is about articles, which is really interesting. Definitely how MARC records tend to have information sort of distributed across multiple records, controlled access points, uneven implementation of lookup services. And I promised we wouldn't just summarize what was written. So I'll stop now, but yes, Lauren, there is, Lauren says there's a lot going on, and that is correct. But does anyone wish to sort of speak up about something they're seeing that's either written down or something that they would like to address directly? We can have a quick chat about that. I do love this list that's emerging. Christopher, when you say you want to voice some concerns, do you want to speak up about that or just have it added to the document? You just want to mention that. Okay. And when you say hubs, do you mean specifically like Library of Congress hubs or some other hub, like linked data hubs, generally speaking? Feel free to just put that in the chat. Yeah, so the concern that is in the chat, one of the concerns is that there's ambiguity about how name authority file data relates to entities like hubs. Sorry, yeah, so the Library of Congress right now has something called hubs. And then there's, which is an actual like thing. It's a URI or a blank note or whatever. It's a thing you can go to that aggregates information about which BIBFRAME hubs, thank you, Sue. Which works might be related. And then there's sort of more of a colloquial use of hubs, which is more like these entities connect to lots of other entities, and so are a really great resource to access so that you can then see what other resources are related. All right, well, if folks, we'll give another minute. If people, does somebody want to kind of actually say something? You can put it in the chat and we can call on you. And if not, that's fine.
I think people should also be able to unmute themselves if they want to say something and can't.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think, I am seeing how, I think one of the objectives of this was also to understand where the information resides and how it can be brought together, because it, as a lot of these comments say, it is distributed. And there are definitely differences between different types of data. So I think one of these is really about articles and how that's very different. There was a comment about archives and special collections. So there seems like there's lots of different use cases or different approaches for how that data is modeled and where it might live. And I think that's good to think about. Okay, so one thing I'm thinking about, Alexandra says, is about the direction of metadata flow. Yes, where is it coming from? Who's responsible for it, I'm assuming, and where it can be edited or updated.
Yeah, so and also, oh, sorry, is it okay if I just add a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, just like kind of the idea of like iteration, and maybe that it might bounce back and forth between systems a bit, or we might overlay things so that it's not like a straightforward path that it takes among these systems necessarily.
Thank you. So I think now that we've thought a little bit about where that metadata may exist, and if people have more regarding like a specific like acquisitions or cataloging step that makes sense for where that or which can explain what they're talking about, please feel free to add that. Let's move on to the second question now, which is at what points in this journey, which may not be a straight line and may involve multiple systems that are just, may have information distributed. Where can linked data connections be made? And again, this can be both how it happens now with the systems that are in use and how it might happen if we were using systems that included more URIs, more identifiers, or used a more linked data approach for the cataloging process itself. Which properties could be used to make those connections? So if I go back here, I think I had a few examples. For the first question, for instance, if we said, can we map connection possibilities to parts of the process? You could say that maybe in cataloging, you could potentially utilize linked data sources for the authorities themselves, or commit to using as many URIs and identifiers as you can wherever it's possible. And that's possible in the MARC right now, some of that at least. You could say that if it were a system that was a linked data cataloging system, that would more easily connect to lookups and data sources that would return URIs and that could be incorporated into your metadata directly. At the discovery layer, we could rely on some of these URIs that are present either in the catalog itself or somewhere else where we can search against or look that information up, and then use those connections to bring back information for display. So these are two examples where you could technically connect to some linked data and bring that back and incorporate it or display it somehow. And the second question is which properties or data sources may be used to make connections. So, there are multiple ones. You can put your favorite one in here. And the third one is which, if any, relevant reconciliation efforts are underway. So you do not have to answer all three questions. This is not a test. Any one of these, and if you want to address more than one, that's perfectly fine. Any one of these where you have thoughts about this or questions about this, please feel free to add that to the document. So this is discussion 2. These are linked from the agenda too, if in case you get lost in the note taking. Discussion 2 has the questions laid out, like we said, and a couple of one made up example, and someone's already come in and put in some notes there, which is great. So if you have a favorite reconciliation effort that you would like to talk about or refer to, if you have ideas about, properties that you think or data sources that you think would be useful, and if you can think about, if you can think about where in the process of our entity journey, any of those connections could be made. Is it possible somewhere in acquisitions? Is it possible when information is being reviewed or information is being renewed, or resources are being renewed? Please feel free to put that in. You're all you folks are great. You're already doing that. So we'll give it, let's say till about 1:38 to do some writing. In the meantime, if anyone has questions, I can just sort of talk about that in chat or look at chat for that. And apologies for anyone who has not been able to add things to the document. I think Hilary already said that we will be saving the chat. So if you have any trouble, please feel free to just say, I meant to add this, but I put it in chat instead because it's not working for me. I'm sorry about that. I appreciate that there are people working hard. I'm half tempted to start saying hello to people I know already, which of course would be unfair. So hello to all of you. When you say one of the comments that uses OER, would you mind just making, expanding the acronym in line? Thank you. Crow and working together. Thank you, Honor. Sometimes. David, let's pick up on that when we've had a little bit more time. It's a very interesting comment. David in the chat said that sometimes reconciling against multiple sources can uncover a lot of disagreement about what an entity is. Yes, where the borders are. Oh, the real world objects debacle. Yes. Sorry to call it that. That's not what it is. Feels like that to me. Okay, so maybe one more minute here, but it's interesting to see there are some mentions of, for instance, the UK ISNI pilot. And I just saw another one in here to go by. I thought. Oh, the use of Wikidata as a reconciliation tool is coming up. And then various concerns around links going rotten, incorrect identifiers, modeling of entities doesn't jive with cataloging standards. And then some sort of, wouldn't it be great if we could just add LOD links? Actually, no, that could be problematic if the auto match is not good. Okay. So I think, as I mentioned before, I think one of the comments here was about how, what defines the border or the boundary of an entity, and what even is an entity may differ from one source to another. Different sources may not just be modeling information differently about the entity, but how that entity is classified and what information is captured. There may be overlap, and there may not be overlap. And the sort of motivation behind the modeling or the objectives may differ, which results in different information, potentially challenging information in some cases, or challenges to what should be displayed and reconciled. So, and then there's some possibilities for connection, including critical perspectives on the data. Does anyone want to speak up? We can spend 2 or 3 minutes seeing a lot of plus ones for what Allison is saying, which is that Wikidata has a lot of conflation of fictitious groups are records for the team, the comic. If Allison, either in chat or like verbally, would you mind kind of explaining what that means?
So normally in cataloging, we treat things as distinct works. So you would have, for like a manga example, manga would be, you know, a distinct work. The anime based off the manga would be its own work. The light novels based off that manga would be its own work. But in Wikidata, oftentimes it's all on one record. It's all on one item. It's an instance of a manga series. It's an instance of an anime, and it's an instance of a light novel series. And so it makes it very hard if you try to reconcile against your catalog's data, because we have different records for every type of work. You know, that Wikidata just conflates them all. And I'm mostly working with comics and manga, and it is everywhere.
And so how do people, or do they deal with that? How do you deal with that when you see that? Do you basically use the same identifier for all the different works then? Like if you have a manga and an anime and whatever, but there's really only one Wikidata entity that represents all that information because it's all been put into one URI.
Well, I don't know if it's right in Wikidata even. Like, I don't know if they should be separated out or not. So right now, I mean, we have created a couple different items for like teams versus comics about that team, because you can't have multiple inception dates. Like the team might have been created at a different time than the comic started, etc. So, you know, I think the modeling is actually wrong in Wikidata too, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Since it's going to have different information, like you said, for the inception date, it just wouldn't make sense to have the same one. Yes, I'm wondering if that's, you know, is that something that needs to be addressed on the Wikidata end, or something, I don't want to say if it's inherent to the Wikidata model. I'm not sure that that's true. The one example that comes to mind is we were looking at pseudonym information and see also information. And so for our Library of Congress name authority, for instance, and our favorite example is Mark Twain and Samuel Clemens or whatever. Samuel Clemens and Mark Twain are really just one Wikidata URI, but they're actually separate Library of Congress URIs, although in the real world, they're the same person. So, you know, this is a bit of a confusing territory as to when you try to use that information and bring that information to the person, like what is that? How do you reconcile across that? Do you use the same URI for both, which I think in our particular case we did, because both of them were that Wikidata URI, because there's only one person. Okay. Does anyone else have anything? I see some good chat happening. Lots of items in Wikidata need picking apart into different entities. Thank you for bearing with me so far. Okay, so let's take some of that. And I, again, greatly appreciate the comments you put in the chat and also in the document. And some plus ones emerging as well, which is cool. Some things are being voted up. So I can, let's see. I'm not sure if these is the same person plus one to 3 times, or if it's separate plus ones. But this one seems to be getting some love, which is that need properties that capture nuanced relationships between URIs and different vocabularies. Strict same as equivalence isn't always appropriate, which I feel like it kind of captures some of the use cases that we just talked about, or we're referring to, not the incorrect Wikidata modeling, but that the boundaries are different in different data sources. And Rob says, if we ever want to do inferencing, it can't be SCOS close match, SCOS exact match, as they imply that the subject and object of the relationship are concepts, which might not be true, right? If we're dealing with something that's not a concept. Okay, well, that's a lot of interesting info. Let's go to the third question then, since we have about 15 minutes left, and I don't know that any of you want to spend any more time on this than you need to. So with the kinds of information that we've thought about or gathered so far in this document, or the kinds of questions that we've been thinking about, can we think of places where these sorts of connections that we could make, even with the challenges that are present, could provide, for instance, useful context for our end users, enable retrieval of related works and resources, or support browsing. And to go back to my slides very quickly, some examples here are, for instance, being able to link to authors and subjects from another linked data source that has more descriptive information or relationships that we're not capturing in our bibliographic metadata, can provide useful context to end users. So an example is knowledge panels, but you can also think, for instance, in terms of, I'm just coming off of the other presentation, so went directly to Discogs in my head, but any other information, like UW-Madison's production system uses information from I think DBpedia as well. Connections enabling retrieval of related works and authors. Like, what do I mean by that? So for instance, if you used something like an influence relationship, or you have access to pseudonym info and see also relationships, you may be able to provide better suggestions to people, or you may be able to help them search for related authors or authors who are in fact the same, or share pseudonym. And connections supporting browsing relationships. So subject hierarchies is one example. Being able to crosswalk between multiple hierarchies could provide people with a better understanding of what that subject really is, or what related subjects are possible, and where else they might look. So with that, if folks can start to talk about this. Rob, with people, I think some people are already typing in some comments and suggestions for discussion 3. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the equivalent term. Is that a linked art ontology term that you had to coin?
I've talked loads already today, but very briefly. Yeah, so we ran into our same as SCOS close match, exact match problem, and essentially minted a new term which we call equivalent, where the subject and object of the relationship are equivalent within the context of their system, to try to avoid some of the different models in different systems getting in the way of linking. So you can't make many assumptions based on it, but it's at least a way of saying these two things are conceptually pretty close, even if they're not identical.
Thank you. Yeah. That's very, definitely an interesting way to try to handle that problem. Because not everything is a concept, and some things really are, for someone who might want to use that information, not necessarily someone modeling it, but someone who wants to be able to, for instance, display something in the discovery layer, or even if they're trying to consolidate information across multiple sources, being able to point that out as like these two URIs are in fact representing or supposed to represent the same person or whatever. Even if they have different approaches to defining what that entity is, where those boundaries are. Got a bunch of +1s around our current discovery systems don't even do a good job of taking the advantage of the relationships built into authorities. There are a lot of implicit relationships in MARC records, including alphabetically closed subjects that are not explicitly declared as related. Yes, I don't know if, well, there's alpha. I'm sorry, I was pausing at whether this was a good thing or a bad thing, based on like what the person who wrote that thought, whether this was good or bad. That we don't use alphabetically closed subjects because that was something that would have been useful in a world of car doors, but isn't really anymore. I do wonder though about subject headings with multiple components because those seem related, and we could avail ourselves of that. Yeah, if we are able to use linked data as a way of being able to model that information so we can better take advantage of that, better bring those relationships out. Let's see. So we'll give it 2 more minutes and then we can just open the floor. Relevance ranking, yes. I hope I'm not acting too much like someone, like you're writing stuff and I'm just sort of hovering over your shoulder and at times just saying things. That would be I hope people are not having trouble with the document anymore, but like I said, if you can always put it in the chat if you are. I feel like this is like an in-bullet discussion happening, which is great. It's like a thread. Okay, so let's look over these really quickly. Linking out to relevant items, support searches at any point in the search, be able to use that information and, you know, to type ahead as suggest terms. Those are some great thoughts here. Problematic subject headings, being able to replace those with more aware versions. That seems to be a topic that has come up in multiple contexts, and people are trying to handle this within their systems the best they can, but how might we use a linked data approach to that? Intuitively present links between works and reviews. They often find reviews of the work rather than the work itself. Would someone mind taking this real quick, or maybe in the chat or on the call? Is this a concern that when people are trying to search for a work in the library, they find the reviews instead of the work itself? Or am I misreading this? Yes. Okay. Researchers look for a book, but will only find a short review article. Gotcha. All right. And we want to be able to prioritize or the actual work and not the reviews. So that seems to be getting some attention here in the chat as well. Our current discovery systems don't do a good job taking advantage of the relationships. And then this sort of thread here about subjects, variants, no relation declared between philosophy and philosophers or between X and literature. LC's rules for subjects are very restrictive for the online world. Then there are some examples of like being able to provide context around authors, contributors, books, allowing additional kind of relationships like familiar relationships or the subjects of works in work records. Sort of a shelf view of the classification and enabling more browsing. Relevance ranking, a drag and drop interface to re-shelf list items. This is getting into minority report UI territory. I like it. Browsing different data sets has to round up to a common denominator and display the data differently than the original data. Would someone want to talk about that a little bit more? And you can put it in the chat. Or not. I think it's an interesting point. I think I understand it, but I wasn't 100% sure. It sounded like what the person who wrote this meant was if you have different data sets and you're trying to provide that information in some sort of hierarchy or browsing UI, you may have to kind of go outside the actual data to be able to provide a bridge between terms in that data set, but I don't want to put words in this person's mouth. Misalignment and modeling decisions could be highlighted to foreground multiplicity. And we are not currently using linked data to make multilingual records available. Yes, I would add a +1 to that. It would be great to be able to address the multilingual search problem in a better way. We have 2 minutes left, and you've all been really wonderful with adding things and putting stuff in chat. Does anyone have any other comments or questions? Hopefully I didn't mumble too much. Is it possible to download? Yeah, the document should be freely available. Kristen, I can put the link for you again. Thank you, Stephen. Yes, you. And you should be able to add directly to it. I don't know why it's just adding everything as a comment. Okay, Hilary and Jeannette, back to you.
Thanks so much, Huda, for leading this great session. As mentioned, the doc will still be available, so you can go back and peruse all of the great additions and continue to comment. Another place where you're able to continue discussion about discovery related aspects is the Discovery channel in the LD4 2021 Slack. So I definitely recommend jumping on over there if you'd like to keep up with anything that was brought up today. And the next session is in 15 minutes, Poster Minute Madness. So check out Sked for the link, and hope to see you there and at other conference sessions this week too. And thanks everyone for attending. It looks like there's a comment. Can you post link to YouTube chat too? Yes, I'll be saving the chat, and we'll make sure that that's available to everyone along with the recording. Thanks, everyone. Take care and have a great rest of your day or evening.